Hi guys, and welcome to my tutorial and showcase for Cooking 2.0. This plugin basically offers players a large number of recipes that they can craft using ingredients that they find from different sources, such as cutting trees, mining rocks, picking up stones, collecting mushrooms, corn, potatoes, berries, pumpkins. There's 19 different sources that players can obtain these items from, and we can find. I'll show you that in just a moment. Basically to access this, first off, when a player has a relevant permissions, which is cooking.use, I've assigned this to the default user so everyone in the server has access to this, and that will allow them to receive a menu when they open up a barbecue. You can see we've got a button called cooking menu. So when I click this, it's going to give us a recipe menu, which is obviously a list of all of the recipes that we have. So this is the default stuff at the moment. So we've got pumpkin pie, berry cobbler, pancakes, butterfried steak, French toast. There's about 41 recipes in here by default. Now, if you wanted to see a list of ingredients and where to get them from, so if I click on one of these, you can see we've obviously got ingredients required to make these items. We've got a picture of our item. We've got a description of our item, the buff description of the item, which is, for example, French toast. When this meal is consumed, this meal will share all of your consumed food with those around you, increasing the calories, and how long the buff lasts for. Now if I click the ingredients button here, or the I button, it'll take you to the list of ingredients and where these are actually gathered from. So intestines are gathered from all animals, so any animal, any mammal will drop these intestines. Cinnamon you get from wild hemp bushes, eggs from chickens, cornflour from corn obviously, and it's obviously quite a large number of different ingredients available. I've also got the default items in here, which you can see are represented by default item. I've also got some crafted ingredients too, which these ingredients are obviously required to be crafted in order to be used. As you can see, obviously here, so cheese, sausage. So let's go ahead and craft an item. So I'll give myself some materials and I'll create, say, a berry cobbler, for instance. Alright, so if I click on the berry cobbler, you can see it requires 5 cornflour, 3 cinnamon sticks, and 5 of each of the berries, which I do have, except for green, of course. If I click cook, you'll see an icon appear down in the bottom right corner with a timer on it. Basically, this is just a cooking timer, so this prevents me from cooking anything else while this is being cooked. And this is completely configurable. Every item can have its cooking timer adjusted. Or there are also permissions that'll make all cooking instantaneous if that's what you guys would prefer. But while that's ticking down, let's have a look at a few more recipes. It's got black pudding, which gives you the madness buff for the duration, which basically means when it's consumed it just screams. I've got pumpkin pie, which will make you feel comfortable for the duration, which is 2 minutes. These are the ingredients you're required to make it. Things like sushi, which will reduce the amount of damage you take from animals by 75%. Mushroom soup, which will give you reduce melee damage by 75% of the original value. Burritos, this will make you invisible to Bradley tank for the duration. Curry, this will basically make you immune to fire damage for the duration. So there's really some cool unique ones in here. We can see our berry cobbler has been completed, so we're going to eat it and see what happens. So you can see here that the buff appears at the top right corner. You can see it starts ticking down. Now if we go back into our cooking menu here, you can see the berry cobbler is giving us heal share, which means if I heal myself, any player around me is also going to receive that same amount of health. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone around me, so I can't show you that. But let's turn these permissions on so I can make things for free, and let's create a few more meals and see what the effects are like. Alright, so we're back in the recipe menu now. So I wanted to create myself, let's just say, pumpkin pie. So that's gonna give me an immediate buff. So I'm gonna create that. I'm gonna grab black pudding, which is basically a madness meal. So we'll create that, and then we'll get we'll say pizza. It's probably a good example as well. Alright, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna spawn myself a barrel. Let's do 2. Give myself a weapon. Alright, I'm going to firstly eat my pumpkin pie. You can see where this is eaten. my comfort goes to 100%. You can see that starting to tick down at the top there. Now I'm going to eat my black pudding. Now when black pudding's eaten, whenever a player talks in game, like this, you can hear a horrible screaming sound emit from the player. And that's public, so everyone can hear. Absolutely terrible, but a good little potion, and my players seem to love it. And the third one we're going to have here is the pizza. So when this one is consumed, whenever it hits a barrel, you can see my economy value is going to go from 8831 to 8832. So it works in a very similar method to the way the scrap tea works, but obviously for economic dollars. So that's how the consumption kind of works. You can have a maximum of 3 buffs active at a time that actually have timers attached to them. Things like the food, well, the calorie extension buff doesn't have a timer active on it. It's just kind of a passive timer that tracks in the background. So you can stack that as well as 3 other things. There's also one on here called I call it horse crack, but it's it's actually a horse feed. And this one's actually really cool because this effectively makes your horse faster when you give them the horse crack. So if I examine my horse's speed right now, my horse is sitting at 38.9 kilometers per hour. If I move this item into the horse's inventory, you can see it's given it an extra 50 kilometers per hour speed, which is obviously quite significant. Now this lasts for, I think it's about 3 minutes, and it doesn't take up one of your buff stacks, which means, yeah, you're free to buff yourself up even more, but just means your players can obviously move and get themselves a faster horse if they please. So that's pretty much it for the cooking side of things. So let's move on to the gathering side, and I'll set up a few items to gather, and I'll show you how the ingredients work. Okay, so I've spawned some collectible resources in here to test with, and I've also got myself a chainsaw. So if we have a look at our ingredients menu, we can see that things such as maple syrup is gathered from all trees. Things like coriander and watercress is gathered from wild hemp bushes. Fish eyes are gathered from gutting fish. Carrots are gathered from potato patches, tomatoes from pumpkin patches, etc, etc. So let's give you an example of how that kind of worked with the inventory at the moment. You can see here I just received 2 maple syrup. Now, the way the collection works is it's on every single time a tree is hit or an item is basically interacted with, it rolls a chance out of 1,000. So for example, if I hit this with a chainsaw, I just rolled 5 chances to get maple syrup, which you can see obviously yielded 1 maple syrup. I just rolled another 5 chances, whereas if I was to use something like an axe, for instance, this would be 1 chance per hit. It's obviously much slower than chainsaw. Now I'll probably end up putting configurations in there to reduce the amount of items you get from a chainsaw or reduce the chance percentage, but as it stands it's the same as an axe. So regardless of what you hit this with, as long as it yields a that's for another plugin, disregard that. As long as it yields a hit, or as long as it yields wood, you're going to get maple syrup or add from this tree. Now, one thing we obviously with all these new ingredients, bags are going to get pretty full very quickly, so we have the ability to craft an ingredients bag. Basically, all this does is it holds an extra 12 ingredients when opened. So we're just going to get that, and when you open this bag, it's going to add slots. You can see I've already got some items in here already. And one of the benefits to this is it's going to put the items straight into the bag itself, as long as you've obviously allowed that in the configuration. So it's just being placed straight into my bag now. There we have it. So let's grab a few more items. Let's go harvest these pumpkins and see what we get. We've got some tomatoes. Let's get the corn here. got some rice, some corn flour. So we got 6 rice and 2 corn flour there. And let's try the ham. We've got some watercress, some thyme, some turmeric. Yeah, it's all just going straight into the bag. And that's pretty much how the gathering works for the ingredients. So when the player accumulates enough ingredients, they can bring it to a barbecue and obviously use it. Now there is one other type of ingredient. You can see here we've got fish. And when I gut fish, I get things like fish eyeballs, which obviously go into my bag. So if I don't do that when you have the bag open. You can see here I'm getting things like fish oil, seaweed, turmeric, not turmeric, fish eyeballs. And these are basically used in different ingredients. So these are used in fish eye soup, that's used in sushi, and these ones here are used to create olive oil. No, sorry, cooking oil, sorry. So we can use 5 of these to create 1 cooking oil, which is a foundation for a lot of different recipes. So that's an example of another interaction that you can use. So that's pretty much all there is to it for the harvesting side of things. Alright, so we're going to cover the installation of the plugin. It's actually very simple. It's a simple matter of simply dropping the plugin into your Oxide plugins folder. And the plugin does the rest. So we're going to navigate to Oxide, plugins, and we're going to paste our plugin in here. And you can see when we do, our plugin is now loaded. We have 39 recipes loaded, 53 items, and yeah, she's pretty much good to go. Now, if you want to confirm that this is installed correctly, we can go back to our Oxide directory, go to config, and we can see we have cooking.json in our folder here. So if we open this up very quick, you can see we have our configuration file in here ready to go, which I'll cover in the next section. Alright, so we're going to run through the configuration file here. As you can see, it is quite long. But what we're going to do is I'm going to show you, and the reason for that is obviously because of all the ingredient settings and recipe menu settings and whatnot. So I'm going to show you obviously the core stuff here, and then I'm going to take you through and show you how each of the ingredients and recipes work in a different section. So let's start at the top here. Each player, so allow players to grow items allow player grown items to spawn ingredients. Now this means that when a player grows an item such as pumpkin, corn, potato, all the growables, it allows these items to yield an ingredient when they harvest it. So traditionally, when you harvest them in the wild, things like pumpkins, potatoes, berries, that sort of thing, they will roll their chance to be able to provide that player with the chance to obtain that item. You can do the same thing with player grown stuff, or you can disable them. So if you don't want player grown stuff to be able to yield ingredients, set that to false, otherwise leave it as true. Now lines 3 to 23, these are all the base chance values for each action, and the way this works is it basically rolls a number out of 1,000. So you can see here the roll that we need to obtain is, or that we have a 50 out of 1,000 chance, which is a base chance of 5%. And this is per hit. It's not per entire animal. So when an animal is skinned entirely, or when an animal is hit with a knife or a hatchet or any sort of skinnable tool, every single time it's hit, it's going to roll a chance out of 1,000 and then potentially reward that player with the ingredient. So if you get about sort of 9 or 10 hits to an animal, it's a good sort of 50% chance that you're going to get some form of ingredient from that animal. And the way this works is every single animal obviously has its own value, so you can make things from boars more common than things from chickens and stags. But play around with these values as you guys see fit. Chopping trees works in a very similar manner. So whenever an axe hits a tree, it has a chance to, it'll roll that item chance. So, you know, if it takes 10, 15 chops for a tree to get hit, there's a good chance that you're going to get something from that tree. Same thing with mining and everything else. Obviously, the exclusions here are picking hemp and corn and berries and whatnot, because you're only going to get one chance, because you're only picking one item. So set these to whatever you like. Now, there is a difference between picking hemp that's been generated by the map and picking hemp that's been generated by a player, so grown by a player. And these are individual values here. So we've got a base chance of 10% when picking up a random wild hemp plant, and corn, potato, and pumpkin, and whatnot. And then we have a base value of 5% for if these items were grown, obviously because they're going to be able to be produced in much higher quantities. So you can set these, you know, higher or lower, whatever you want. Picking up mushrooms is again a simple one. Just when a player picks up a mushroom, rolls a chance to obtain the item. Berries and berries when grown. And the final one here is, well, obviously outside of collectible nodes, which are the little, like the rocks and the sulfur things that you pick up. And the last one here is gutting a fish. So when you gut a fish, it rolls a chance, a base chance to see if you're going to obtain, you know, an item based on that action. Send notifications when an item drops. So this basically means that a chat message will appear whenever a player receives an item from any of these activities. That's really it. So if you don't want that happening, set it false. Otherwise, leave it as default. Buff update frequency. So when you're consuming a potion, or so when you're consuming a meal, the buff timer appears at the top of your screen there. This is how often you want that buff update to refresh, I guess. So you'll see in the demo video that every 2 seconds we'll be counting down by 2s, and obviously updating every 2 seconds. That's controlled by this. The higher the frequency, the less servitol there's going to be, but honestly, sort of 1 to 2 seconds is generally going to be fine, unless you're running a couple hundred players. Cooking progress update time. So this means that when a player is actually cooking a meal, it's going to update the timer every second. So you can see the timer just kind of ticking down second per second. Again, set this value to whatever you like. Heal share distance. So when a player consumes a heal share meal, this is the distance that other players have to be within range of that player to receive the heals. For example, a player consumes a meal that gives them heal share. They then hit themselves with a med syringe. Any player within 10 meters of that player is going to get the effect of that medical syringe, so long as that player is actually receiving health. If that player is actually on 100 health, they're no longer healing, so they're no longer going to be providing anyone else around them with heals. Food share distance, same sort of thing, obviously except for calories. So when a player eats food and their calories are increasing, anyone within 20 meters is going to receive that increase as well. Same sort of thing though if they're not actually receiving any calories. So if they're at 500 food and they eat food and nothing actually goes up, no one else around them gets anything. Comfort update rates. When a player receives or consumes a potion that gives, a meal that gives them a comfort, like sort of a comfort meal, so it puts their comfort up to 100%. This is how often that refreshes. The higher the value, the less chance the player's actually going to be at 100%, so adjust this as you please, but I've set it to 1 because it seems to work fairly reliably on my server. How much health should a health overload meal give you? So this is basically how much, what the maximum health a player has is set to when consumed. So for example, obviously the base value of a player's health is 100, or the max health, sorry. So by default, this would set the player's max health to 150 for the duration of the potion, and then automatically revert them back down sort of to 100 if they're above it, or leave their health at whatever it is, but obviously reduce their maximum down to its default value. You can set this value to whatever you want, so if you want to give the player 500 health, you can set that to 500 if you want to. How much should the calorie cap increase for? So basically, when a player eats a food overload meal, this is how long the player's meal will basically increase, or how long their calorie cap will increase. So by default, the calorie cap is set to 500. when you obviously eat this meal, it's going to increase that above 500 to 1,000, 2,000, whatever you set the next value to. And this is for the duration of how long it should stay there like that for. Now, things that will affect this are when a player dies, when a player disconnects from the server, or obviously when they run out of time. So the base value is set to 2 hours. So you can see here at after 2 hours, it's going to remove that sort of calorie cap. And if the calories of the player is over 500 at the time of that removal, it's going to revert them back down to 500. You can see here the calorie cap to increase too. This is how many calories the player can actually have. Now this isn't going to give them the calories, this is just simply going to set their threshold higher. So if they're currently at 400 calories when they consume this meal, their calories are going to stay at 400, but it allows them to eat more food and increase that calorie count to up to, whatever you set this value to. Click calorie overload on reconnect. Now this is just a failsafe that if the plugin unloads, or if they crash, or if the server doesn't catch them dying or disconnecting, and prevents them from effectively having a permanent calorie increase until it's handled in another way, shape, or form. So leave that true if you're not familiar with, if you're not sure. Otherwise, set it to whatever you want. Animal resistance damage scale. This is basically for the animal resistance potion, and this is what the damage gets scaled down to, not how much it's reduced by. So 1.0 is the full value, so think of it as 100%. 0.25 is what the actual value is going to be after the effect. So let's just say, for example, the animal hits the player for 10 health for the full value. But we have this potion enabled, it's going to reduce that damage down to 2.5 based on this value here. Now all of these work the same, so explosion resistance works exactly the same. So if you eat a meal that has explosion resistance on it, it scales it down by 0.5 by default. So basically 50% of the damage is going to be removed. Melee damage works same values as animal, so 75% of the damage is going to be removed. So it's only going to do 25% of the original damage. The next one here is how much econ should the wealth buff give per barrel hit. Now this is very similar to how scrap tier works. Whenever a barrel gets destroyed, it's going to give the player an economic dollar. So obviously the economy plugin is required for this. And once it is on obviously when loaded and the player consumes this food, whenever they hit a barrel, it's going to give them $1. Remove buffs on death. I highly recommend this one, just to make sure the buffs don't stay around for longer than they should. It just means that whenever a player dies, any buffs that they currently have active on them will be removed. And that includes things like the calorie overload, etc. Chance for craft refund to refund the materials on a successful craft out of 100. So basically this is just a percentage chance out of 100. So whenever a player crafts an item, or successfully crafts an item, there's a 10% chance by default that the components used to craft that item will actually be refunded. Upgrade refund and research refund work exactly the same way, except obviously upgrade works when the player upgrades any building block from whatever materials or whatever material. There's a 10% chance that they'll be refunded the material costs for that upgrade. And research refund is the same sort of thing, but when they research an item on the research table, not when they actually consume the item and put it into their blueprints. So whenever the actual item is researched, there's a 10% chance that they'll be refunded the scrap costs for researching that item. How often should a regen timer increase to a player's health? So basically, this is these two values here for the regen potion. So regen meal, sorry. That basically means that how much health a player will receive and how often that player will receive that health. So let's just say, for example, we've got a meal that lasts for a minute, and it's been assigned the health regen buff. That player will receive 5 health every 5 seconds for the duration of the potion, which is 60 seconds. Allow players to build and use the ingredient bag. Only non-standard ingredients can be put inside of it. Now this is basically a recipe that gets added to the configuration. The The players can basically build a ingredient bag where they can press the open button and add and remove ingredients. It will also automatically put ingredients from when gathered directly into the bag if it's on their person as well. And the benefit to that is inventory space. Obviously there's 40 odd items that have been added with this plugin, so it's a lot of additional items that the player has to cart around, so this bag here is pretty useful. And they can craft it by default for 500 cloth in the from any barbecue. If the ingredient bag is enabled, should items be placed directly into it if the player has it in their inventory. So again, this is just a thing. I highly recommend just setting this to true, that way new players don't have to worry about it, but obviously it's whatever you guys want to do. Value to buff horse stats by. Now this isn't really any percentage buff, it's just kind of one of those values you need to play around with. I set it to 15, and to give you an example of what sort of effect that has, it'll increase a horse's speed from about 45 kilometers to about 120 kilometers per hour. So significantly buffs the horse's speed. And the way this works is that the item needs to be basically right-clicked into the horse's inventory. So if you've got the horse's inventory open, you right-click the item, it gets put into the inventory and consumed, and that horse has the buff for the duration. And this is what the buff stats are kind of calculated by. So the higher the number, the faster your horse is going to go. The lower the number, the slower it's going to go. How long should the player be invisible for when the invisible meal is consumed? So basically, the invisible meal's timer isn't relevant for the invisibility. It is done based on the value here. Now this may change by the time this plugin gets released. I might actually just assign this to use the meal's buff, which I guess would make more sense. So yeah, if you do see this value, obviously this is how it's controlled. If you don't, it means that I've patched it. It just simply inherits the recipe's duration. What chance increase should the gathering meal provide to obtain ingredients when consumed? Now this is basically an additional chance that an item will be obtained when harvesting. So if a player consumes a meal that increases the chance of obtaining ingredients when harvesting, this is how much of a chance increase it is. So, and it stacks directly with these values. So for example, if I hit a boar and I have a base value of 50 out of 1,000, if I'm running this potion here, it's going to increase that to 100 out of 1,000. So it's a cumulative. This does not stack though, so you can't have more than one of these going. You actually can't have more than one of any buff going. It just simply refreshes the buff timer if you consume the same meal. Allow players to sell ingredients via the farmer's market. So this is a market that's accessible in game. Now it could be either assigned to a NPC or a chat command, and this simply enables that market feature. Maximum quantity of stock of an item that the market can sell. So because the market doesn't actually generate any items into the game, it simply buys items from players and then resells them for a higher value. This is how many items can actually be sold to the market. So for example, if someone goes out and does a massive farm of maple syrup, they can sell a maximum of 100 maple syrup to the actual market without issue. But as soon as they go over 100, that's it, the market won't purchase anymore. But it also means that no one else is able to sell those items to the market. So it's a fine line. You kind of balance that depending on what your server requirements are. Allow players to use a chat command to open the market. True. So this basically means that a player can actually use a chat command instead of requiring an NPC. If you want to attach this to an NPC, simply change the name of the NPC to Farmer's Market. The case isn't relevant. And then set this value to false. That means that a player will need to speak to that NPC in order to open the market. And you can obviously have more than one NPC with the same name around the area, and it'll open the market regardless of which one you talk to, because it's name based. But otherwise, if you just want it to be like a global market and players are able to access it from anywhere, just set that to true. And they will need the permissions for it as well. What currency should we use for farmers for farmers market transactions, scrapbook economics. So if you want to use obviously your economics plugin to pay and to buy and sell market items, you set that to economics. If you want to use scrap, set it to scrap. This is case sensitive, so make sure you use lowercase. Allow default items to be bought and sold in the market. So if you want to allow things like potatoes and raw, pumpkins and raw sort of chicken and everything else to be bought and sold in the market, then set that to true. Otherwise, leave it as false. Name of the NPC that will open the farmers market when spoken to requires human NPC. So yeah, again, requires a human NPC plugin, and this is the name of the actual NPC. So set this to whatever you want to call the NPC, and what it means is whenever a player interacts with an NPC that matches this name, it's going to open the market menu for them. Play effect when a player buys or sells an item at the market. So it just basically plays like a vending machine. By default plays a vending machine purchase thing, like a little cha-ching. So you set that to false if that gets annoying. So that's pretty much the basic basis of the configuration side of things. There is obviously ingredients and recipes to go through as well, which I'll be going through in the next section. I'll be explaining that a bit more in depth, and then I'll be obviously showing you how to add your own custom ingredients and your own custom recipes. So let's get that into that in the next section. Alright, so what we're going to do in this section is we're going to show you information on the ingredients as well as the recipes, how it's formatted, what it looks like, and each of the fields that are available to be manipulated. So as you can see here, we've got quite a number of ingredients, and this particular editor allows me to minimize the information, makes it a bit easier to read. So we'll start with ingredient information. Alright. Now, the things that are required when adding an ingredient, well, there's two different types of ingredients. There's the default ingredients, which are basically already in the game, and there is custom ingredients, which obviously we need to add and create. Now, adding default ingredients is quite simple. Things like chocolate, fish, bear meat, that sort of thing. All you really need to do is set the display name to be lowercase and match exactly what the item says in-game. Now, the way this is structured is you've got a key, and then you've got the value, which is what we call the class. Now, the class is responsible for providing information such as the short name, the skin, etc., etc. But when we're querying and trying to find these ingredient items, we need these names to kind of match. So let's just say, for example, I'll just jump on a Rust Labs. Let me find an item, and I'll give you an example. Alright, so the item example we've got here is cactus flesh. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new item here called cactus flesh. So I'm just going to go into this one. I'm going to copy an existing structure. I'm going to separate it with a comma behind the curly bracket of the last one. I'm going to paste it. Now you always need to make sure that the last curly bracket in any of the configuration stuff doesn't have a comma. Otherwise, yeah, you're gonna have issues. First thing we're going to do is we're going to rename it. So we've got an item here called cactus flesh, which is the default name, the default display name of the item in Rust. So we're going to put this in lowercase. So cactus flesh is now our key. Now our base short name is actually going to be cactus flesh, funnily enough. Now, to give you an example of what I'm working with, this is the item here. So cactus flesh is the name. The actual short name of the item is cactus flesh. That's the short name that Rust recognizes it by. Now you can get short names quite easily if you just go to the Rustified website. I'll add a link to the sales page for a list of item names, and also includes the short names. And because we also require an image URL, we're also going to copy this image URL up here. So all items all items from all default items have a image or a page that matches this kind of structure here. Basically, if you just type in the short name .png, it'll give you the item's picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the imager off and this one here, and we're going to replace it with that. Now, because this is a default item, we want to make sure the skin value is set to 0. If this was a custom item that we're creating, we would set the skin value to, obviously, whatever the skin number is, which I'll show you shortly. Now, when it comes to the gathered from and gathered, so when it comes to gathered from, this is basically the source material, the source that the actual item is gathered from. Now, I'm going to put a reference to this on the sales page, so you'll be able to see exactly what values represent what gathering sources. But I'll put it up on screen real quick for you. Alright, so these are our gathering sources. So you can see here we've got 0, it represents nodes such as stone, metal, sulfur nodes. All trees is represented by a value of 1, palm trees 2, hemp 3, collectible nodes 4, berry bushes 5, etc, etc. You can see here cactus flesh at the moment has inherited obviously the one that we copied, which was sausage, which was a crafted item, which you can see at value 19. But because we don't want cactus flesh to be harvested from that, because it's a default item and Rust already has a method for spawning it in-game, we actually want to set this value to 18 because it's a default item. So we're going to change this from 19 to 18. And that then represents obviously the item being default. Everything else, because this is a default item, nothing else really is relevant apart from maybe the market buy and sell price if you're going to enable default items to be sold in the market. This one's pretty much good to go, so that means that when we reload the plugin and load this in game, we're going to have cactus flesh as part of our ingredients list now. Now, if we wanted to add a custom item, I'm going to take you through here that process next. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to open up a tool that I've purchased from CodeFling, or Loan. I think it's available for both. Let me just get into it. Now, it's basically a custom icon creator. So I'm just going to load it up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply load I'm going to give the item a name, so I'm going to type in line. So we're going to upload a line. Go to Open File Explorer. Open up my poorly named line. And you can see it here. Now, a couple of prerequisites. I generally recommend you make the images sort of 500 by 500, and obviously transparent background looks the nicest. Once you've got all that sorted, I'm going to submit my item, and it should open up a page with the item. So you can see here my items are now on Steam. So the number that I want to copy is this one number up here. This is the unique U-long number that Steam uses for pretty much anything workshop related. So I'm going to copy that. Actually, but first I'm going to create a new input. So I'm going to copy what we've done here. I'm going to add another block of code. As you can see here, the last one doesn't have a comma. I'm going to call this one line. So because it's a custom, I can call it whatever I want. I'm going to set the base short name to blood, which is what I've done. The base item for a lot of these previous items here. And what this means is it's the item that the Rust is going to reskin to make it look like the item we want. Because blood doesn't really have a function in the game, it's a really good item to use as a base item, and because it has a high sort of stack number, it doesn't sort of fill up boxes and inventories too much either. But you can use things like small batteries or whatever you want as the base item. It doesn't really matter. As long as it doesn't have like an eat or a use function, it's fine. The skin, obviously we want to pull this back up here. We'll get the skin ID. We'll copy the skin ID into there, replacing the 0. Now gathered from, we want to pull back up our little gathered from table. Now because this is a vine, I think berry bush is a vine, so we're going to change it to berry bush, which is, you can see, has the value 5. So we're going to change this gathered from 18 to 5. We're going to leave the drop rate at 100, the drop weight at 100, and the max count we're going to set to something like maybe 5. And this is the maximum amount of limes that we're going to get per hit, per pick. So when a player picks one of the berry bushes, it'll roll a number between 1 and 5 and give the player that many limes. And the last thing we want to do is we want to upload the image to Imager. The reason for that is because we want to have an actual picture that the menu can reference. So we're just going to quickly do that. And that's all done. So we're going to copy this link here. And we're just going to go paste the link in and put .png at the end. You can adjust your market buy, your market sell, and you can even give it a default quantity if you really want to, but you know, up to you. And that's pretty much it. We now have lime added to our you know, ready for our recipes to use. So if, you know, this is now a custom item in our game and drops from a berry bush. Now all we need to do is simply add it to a menu and we can make something. So let's do that now. I'll show you the way the recipes work and how to create your own recipe. Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at our recipe information, see how they're structured, and we're going to create our own custom recipe and assign a buff to it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to expand the recipe's information, and you can see the way these are structured. We've got recipes that obviously provide buffs, and then we've got recipes that are actually crafted ingredients, which then are used in recipes again. An example of this would be cheese. So cheese is a recipe is an ingredient that we're going to use in a lot of recipes. The way it's structured is very similar to ingredients. It has a base short name, which is set as blood, has an image URL, has a description, which is what appears in the actual the menu when you're looking through the recipe menu, the skin of the item, and then it has a list of ingredients with their own display names and quantities. Now these display names need to match exactly what we put up in our ingredients up here. And if you're going to add an ingredient that is also a crafted item that's also an ingredient, we need to make sure that we also list it in the ingredients menu section up here as well. So an example again is cheese. So if I go back to ingredient information and look for cheese, you can see I have an ingredient called cheese with this information here. Now you can use the same skin name, the same image, blah blah blah. You can use all this same stuff. It just needs to have exist in both the ingredients and cheese. And just remember, that's only if you're going to use this as an ingredient. If you're just simply going to create your own recipe that's going to give a buff, don't worry about it. So we'll go to the bottom of the page here. So you can see here some of them actually have quite a number of ingredients included with them. They also include the buff durations. This is how many seconds the buff lasts for. The cook time. This is basically how long it's cooking for before the player receives it and is able to create another one. And the buff type, which again is a value which we reference from a table. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the block of code here. We're going to add a comma, and we're going to paste a new one. Now we're going to call this one lime bars. We use a base short name of any sort of edible. I use fish.cooked for pretty much everything. No particular reason, just as an eat function. So it's easy to use, but realistically you can use whatever you want. And obviously we've got a few things we need to change here. So I'm just running off a little recipe I found online, which is basically butter, flour, eggs and limes. So the first one I'm going to do is lime. So we've already created the item called lime. So we're going to change this to lime, making sure that this is exactly the same name that we created for the ingredient. And because it's a lime bar, we want to have a few limes. We're going to set the quantity to 5. The next thing is flour. Now I've already got corn flour included here, and I don't really want to create anything. We don't really have any sources of wheat and rust, so I'm going to use corn flour. And we're going to set this to a value of 2, because I want to have two pieces of corn flour as part of this recipe. The next one is eggs. So I'm going to set this to 2 as well. And the way I'm finding this is, where I created the thing, but I mean, the way I'm finding this is simply checking to make sure that I've got the ingredients here. So corn flour, egg, lime, etc, etc. So we'll go back down here. Now they're the core ingredients that I have, and then I'm going to use to make lime bars. Oh, and sorry, butter. Let's just put one stick of butter. Now because I don't really need any of these other ones here, I'm going to simply delete them. And again, making sure that the last curly bracket in this list doesn't have a comma. Now the buff duration for this is, well, let's work out what buff we're going to assign first. So let me pull up a table of buffs. Alright, so these are the buffs as well as the relevant the corresponding number that the buff represents. So this will basically be available on the sales page, and it'll have the, I guess, the key and the value reference on there, so you can, you know, look at what each of them do, etc, etc. So what we're going to do for this one, I guess, we're going to add, let's say no fall damage. So this is a nice light dessert, so we're going to say no fall damage. Now, when this is eaten, the consumer is going to take no fall damage for the duration. So this is a value of 22. So this is the number that corresponds to no fall damage. So we're going to take 22, and we're going to set buff type to 22. The cook time we'll leave at 30 seconds. Doesn't really need too long to cook, but we want this to last for 2 minutes. So we're going to set this to 120 seconds. So we've done all the ingredient stuff, we've set the buff duration, we've set the cook time and the buff type. Now we need to add our image URL and our skin ID. So I've taken the liberty of already creating a new item, so I'm going to type this, call this one lime bar. I'm going to open the item up. I'm going to submit the item. So this is going to do the same thing it did before, and it's going to create a page on Steam for me. See here, there's my lime bars. I'm going to take the item ID at the top, copy it, and paste over that skin ID there. So you can see that's my new item ID. The description I'm going to set to this is a yummy lime bar. I'll just say, I don't know, makes you feel lighter. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add an imager link. We're going to add the item to imager. So we're going to remove the imager, or the item URL here, paste the new one in, and add .png at the end. And that's pretty much it. We now have a new recipe in our config called lime bars, with the base short name of fish got cooked, which is basically just simply gives it the function to eat. We have our URL, which is going to display in the recipe menu. We have a description, which is going to display on the description in the recipe menu. It's going to show the picture of the item using the skin ID as an icon in our inventory. The ingredients required to make this item are 5 limes, 2 corn flour, 2 eggs, and 1 butter. The buff duration is going to last for 120 seconds. It takes 30 seconds to cook, and the buff type is 22, which represents no fall damage. So we're not going to take any fall damage for 120 seconds when we eat our lime bar. And that's all there is to it. It's a very, very simple process. I highly recommend this Rust Custom Icons tool. Has been absolutely invaluable to me for creating custom items. And if you plan on sort of expanding this, your recipe menus, it's definitely worth a $10 investment. Yeah, so that's the configuration settings done. Let's load up in game to see what they look like. Alright, so we're going to open up our barbecue now. We're going to go to our cooking menu, look at our ingredients, we're going to see what our new ingredients look like. Go towards the end of the page here, we can see we've got cactus flesh in there now, which is gathered from a default item. And then we've got lime, which is gathered from berry bushes. So if we go back to our recipes, we'll go all the way to the end, and we can now see our lime bars. When we open lime bars, we can see it requires 5 lime, 2 corn flour, 2 egg, and 1 butter. You can see the custom description that we've put here. This is the yummy lime bar, makes you feel lighter. You can see the buff description, which prevents fall damage for the duration, and the duration is 120 seconds. We can cook this. It downloads the skin. And there we go. We no longer take fall damage. Simple as that. Alright, so the final thing I'm going to show you today is the farmer's market. Now the farmer's market is basically a trade hub for players to be able to, buy and sell ingredients. And you have complete control over what those prices are. So it's not like an auction house where players create buy orders and sell orders. It's simply a place where players can sell ingredients for for certain value and buy ingredients for a certain value. So you can set the values to be the same, to be different. It's entirely up to you. Now I'll open the farmer's market on my server here. Give you an example. So some of my players have actually been using this. As you can see, the quantities are different. So by default, every quantity in here is going to be set to 0, unless you adjust it in the configuration directly. And the reason for that is that this guy is only going to sell items that have actually been gathered by players. So if no one's selling any nutmeg or any offal to the farmer's market, then he's not going to have any to sell. The buy price and the sell price is quite simple. You can adjust that in the configuration file for each of the ingredients, or you can just leave it as default. But basically, it acts as a kind of a money sink in your server. So you can have it so players have to buy this ingredient for 10 whatever the currency you decide to use, or sell it for that value. All the text stuff will be fixed up prior to release anyway. So you can see here when I purchased it, it goes from $22,081 down to 71, and then when I sell it, which goes to about 76. Yep, there you go. So basically, it kind of acts as a money sink and gives your players the ability to buy and sell ingredients. Now, my server doesn't have default ingredients on here, it's only the custom stuff, including blood. Not the default things like pumpkins and potatoes, but there is a config option in there which you can enable for that to basically be, so players can sell potatoes and pumpkins and whatnot, but I highly recommend changing the price on those. There's also a capacity as well, which is basically the maximum amount of items that a player can that this vendor can hold, and that's all configurable. So you can see here, available is 100. If I had any if I had any maple syrup on me, I wouldn't actually be able to sell any more to this guy because he already has 100 maple syrup. So, because I've set the value of my configuration to 100, if you want to adjust that and set it to no limit, just set the maximum capacity to 0 or to some ridiculously high number. So it's entirely up to you. But I didn't think any more than 100 on the market. That way, if there's any sort of bugs or any exploits that players manage to find, it kind of caps that how lucrative that really is. And the final thing is it can basically move between scrap and economics. So depending on what your configuration options is, I went through that in the configuration options before. When buying and selling, it can be done for either scrap or eco. You can see here I've got mine done with econ. So that's pretty much all there is to it. I hope you guys enjoyed the plugin. If you have any issues, feel free to send me a message on Discord or in Codefling or Loan or wherever you found it. Otherwise, bon appetit.